and fashion for me is part of living and part of your impression of who you are and what you want to say about yourself.
Picture a boy from the Bronx, born Ralph Lifshitz, standing in a movie theater in the 1950s, watching Cary Grant walk across a screen in a suit that seemed to fit him like a second skin. That single image, more than any fashion school or family business, is where the Ralph Lauren story quietly begins. Decades later, at 86 years old, sitting atop one of the most recognizable fashion empires on the planet, Lauren has spent a lifetime dressing presidents, athletes, and movie stars, and yet he has never stopped being that boy in the theater seat, still chasing the feeling of watching someone who simply looked right. So when Lauren talks about the people who shaped his eye, it is worth listening closely, because these are not casual compliments from a man who has seen it all. These are the blueprints. 5 names keep surfacing whenever Lauren is asked who truly moved him, and none of them were his employees, his models, or his peers in the fashion industry. They were a princess, a movie star, a first lady, a leading man, and a Hollywood beauty who became a humanitarian. Together, they explain almost everything about the brand Lauren built, and about the man who built it. Start with Princess Diana, because she is the name that tends to catch people off guard. The instinct is to remember her as a single frozen image, the sweeping gown, the tiara, the wedding dress with its impossibly long train. But what actually seems to have captured Lauren's attention was something less about any one outfit and more about motion. Diana's style did not sit still. The shy 20-year-old who arrived at Buckingham Palace in high-necked blouses and puff sleeves was almost unrecognizable from the woman photographed a decade later in sharp-shouldered blazers, bold color, and that now legendary black dress she wore the same evening Prince Charles publicly admitted to his affair, a look the British press swiftly nicknamed the revenge dress. Royal biographers, including Tina Brown in her book The Diana Chronicles, have long described how Diana used clothing as a form of communication when she was denied almost every other outlet to speak for herself. That idea, that fashion could function as a quiet, deliberate language rather than mere decoration, is precisely the philosophy Lauren has spent his career trying to bottle into cotton and cashmere. Diana was equally at ease in a formal gown for a state dinner as she was in an oversized sweatshirt and white sneakers on the school run, and both versions of her became iconic in their own right. That duality, the ability to be simultaneously aspirational and completely human, is the tension Lauren has chased in nearly every collection he has ever designed. He wants his customer to feel like royalty in a plain white shirt, and Diana, whether she intended to or not, proved that it could be done. Then there is Steve McQueen, a name that almost writes its own case. If Diana represented evolution, McQueen represented effortlessly, the kind that cannot be taught, only observed and envied. McQueen was not a fashion figure in any conventional sense. He was a race car enthusiast who happened to become one of the biggest film stars of his era, and he dressed like a man who had never once considered what anyone else thought of him, which is exactly why cameras could not stop finding him. A beat-up leather jacket, plain chinos, a simple crew-neck sweater, and somehow the effect read as more assured than a man in a tailored three-piece suit. Lauren has referenced McQueen's off-screen wardrobe, the clothes he wore between takes rather than the costumes written into his scripts, as a kind of accidental blueprint for what would eventually become the entire American sportswear category Lauren built his name on. There is a particular scene worth remembering from the 1968 film The Thomas Crown Affair, in which McQueen's character attends a polo match in a tailored blazer and dark sunglasses, radiating the kind of understated wealth that never once needs to announce itself. Lauren's own design team has cited that film among his enduring favorites, and it is not hard to see why. The scene plays almost like a 2-hour mood board for the world Lauren would spend the next 5 decades manufacturing and selling, a world of quiet money ease built from military surplus jackets, suede boots, and clothes that were never designed to be looked at yet somehow always were. Jackie Kennedy Onassis belongs on this list almost by definition, because if there is one phrase Lauren has spent his entire career trying to define, it is American elegance, and few people before her ever embodied that phrase with such natural authority. Consider the sheer range of her public life, from the meticulously polished First Lady in her pillbox hats and structured Oleg Cassini suits, to the sunglasses and headscarf figure who spent her later decades quietly navigating Manhattan sidewalks while photographers trailed a few steps behind. Both versions of Jackie still look strikingly current today, which says something remarkable considering the distance of more than 60 years. What seems to have resonated with Lauren was not simply that she looked polished, because plenty of women in her position achieved polish. It was that she made polish look completely effortless, with clean lines and quality fabric doing the work instead of ornamentation. There is also a timing detail worth noting. Jackie was defining a distinctly American sophistication at nearly the exact moment a young Lauren was beginning to sketch out what would eventually become Polo, and the parallels between her wardrobe and the brand he would go on to build are difficult to overlook. Letitia Baldridge, who served as Jackie's White House social secretary and later wrote extensively about her style choices, often noted that Jackie favored a small, trusted rotation of designers and pieces rather than chasing an endless stream of new outfits, a philosophy of buying fewer things and making sure they were exactly right. That approach sits almost perfectly opposite to fast fashion, and it lines up with the buy it once, where it forever ethos Lauren has repeated in interviews for decades. Cary Grant is different from the others on this list, because this connection is not speculation pieced together from old interviews. It is documented history, and it may be the most personal relationship Lauren has ever discussed publicly. Long before Polo was a household name, a young Lauren was working as a tie salesman and began mailing Cary Grant simple, solid grey ties, entirely unsolicited, straight to his office in Los Angeles. Staff around Lauren's office reportedly started calling them Cary Grant ties. What happened next sounds almost too tidy to be true, yet Lauren has recounted it himself in multiple interviews over the years. Grant actually called him. He phoned to thank Lauren personally for the ties, and the two struck up a friendship that included lunches in New York and an afternoon together at the racetrack in Los Angeles. Lauren has described conversations with Grant about the people Grant admired, how Grant built his own career, and even a detailed exchange about the precise width of a jacket lapel. It is worth sitting with the strangeness of that image. One of the most famous leading men in Hollywood history, the actor still cited as the definition of impeccable dressing decades after his films first appeared, taking the time to debate tailoring details with an ambitious young tie salesman who had not yet built his empire. Grant's own persona was built entirely on restraint. He was never flashy, never overdone, simply a man who understood exactly how a suit was meant to fit and never felt the need to prove it, and that restraint became one of the cornerstones of everything Lauren would eventually build. It is a lineage with a certain poetry to it, since Grant himself once described how his own early sense of style had been shaped by watching a well-dressed stranger on the ship that first carried him to America as a young immigrant chasing a career on stage. Lauren was not just learning from Grant directly. He was inheriting an idea about elegance that had already been passed down once before he ever mailed that first tie. Finally, there is Audrey Hepburn, who stands as the clearest women's counterpart to everything Grant represented for Lauren on the men's side, and this connection, too, is backed by real, documented history rather than industry rumor. Hepburn did more than influence Lauren from a distance. In 1992, she personally presented him with the first ever Lifetime Achievement Award given out by the Council of Fashion Designers of America, a full-circle moment that placed the single greatest honor of his career directly into the hands of a woman whose restraint he had quietly studied for decades. It is difficult to overstate how symbolic that moment was. Hepburn's entire aesthetic was built around understated glamour rather than spectacle. She was never the loudest or most extravagant actress of her era, yet she became arguably the most referenced style icon in the history of American cinema. Breakfast at Tiffany's alone gave the world an entire vocabulary of elegance: the simple black dress, the oversized sunglasses, a single strand of pearls, proof that restraint could read as the most luxurious choice in the room. What made Hepburn's influence even more lasting was that she was never chasing an image the way modern celebrities often do. She worked closely and loyally with designers like Hubert de Givenchy because she trusted them, and she let her own natural bearing do the rest. Later in her life, she poured much of her time into humanitarian work with UNICEF, frequently photographed in the simplest possible clothing, no gowns, no jewelry, while working in some of the poorest regions of the world. That contrast, a glamorous screen icon who chose quiet, practical service over continued spotlight, appears to have deepened Lauren's respect for her even further, reinforcing an idea he has repeated often, that real elegance is ultimately not about the clothes at all, but about what a person chooses to do with the attention those clothes bring them. Taken together, these 5 names tell a story that goes far beyond fashion. Diana proved that style could evolve alongside a person's inner life. McQueen proved that confidence could not be manufactured, only revealed. Jackie proved that American sophistication needed no borrowed European polish to feel complete. Grant proved that true elegance whispers rather than announces itself. And Hepburn proved that the most enduring glamour is the kind built on restraint and quiet loyalty rather than spectacle. None of these 5 people ever worked for Ralph Lauren, and none of them set out to teach him anything at all. They simply lived and moved through the world with a kind of self-possession that a young boy from the Bronx happened to notice and never stopped noticing. At 86, having built one of the most enduring fashion houses on earth, Lauren is still describing these same 5 figures with the same reverence he must have felt decades ago, watching Cary Grant on a movie screen for the first time. Perhaps that is the quiet lesson underneath this entire story. The most lasting kind of influence is rarely loud. It rarely announces itself with declarations or grand gestures. It simply lingers in someone's memory, patiently, for 60 years, until it reshapes an entire industry without anyone quite noticing it happen.